Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Montgomery Phair, Urban Ranger with Baltimore National Heritage Area. I'm here today with Joel Black, my videographer, to try to highlight some of the incredible pieces of Baltimore history over the last 350 years. So stick with me. I'm going to give you some highlights of some amazing stuff that you're going to see here in Baltimore. The foundational ship, the keystone, if you will, of all the historic ships of Baltimore is the USS Constellation, which is right here behind me. It was the last all-sail, no-steam ship built by the U.S. Navy in 1854. And its first mission was to go out on the seas and interdict slave traders coming into the United States. Though the slave trade had been outlawed in 1808, after that time period, people were still smuggling slaves into the United States. This ship, on its fourth voyage, by the time of its fourth voyage, had stopped nearly 4,000 African Americans from becoming slaves in this country. And that's because it captured them, turned them back, and they went back to their home country without coming here and being enslaved. This ship also saw action during the American Civil War in the Mediterranean and was used as a training vessel by the U.S. Navy at Annapolis all the way up to the 1890s. It came here to this city in 1954, the same year we got the Baltimore Orioles. There's a great staff of volunteers aboard who can tell you all about this last sail vessel in the United States Navy. You can go aboard one ship or many ships that we're going to see today. Directly behind me is another important monument in Baltimore and a functioning building. It's the Maryland World Trade Center building that has an observation tower, the top of the world, on the 27th floor. It's the tallest five-sided structure in the world, designed by I.M. Pei in 1977, houses all the Transportation Authority offices within it. It was put in here directly after the rest of Harbor Place went in 1976, right around the time of the American Bicentennial. You can go aboard. It takes about $10, I believe the last I heard, to go to the top, the 27th floor, and you'll be able to see about 20 miles in all directions. Over my shoulder, you see the last surviving manufacturer in the Inner Harbor. It's Domino Sugar, which has the largest neon industrial sign left in the United States. It was put up in the 1920s. It takes a crew of 3 electricians just to maintain that. At night, you can always see it with the bright magenta color. And Domino Sugar still makes everything from raw brown sugar to hospital placebos at that plant. And that's been here for a long time and the only factory left. Even McCormick, that made Old Bay, has moved out. This is another of our historic ships in Baltimore. This is the light ship Chesapeake. It was built down in South Carolina in 1930s, and it was served as a floating lighthouse. It's got a Fresnel lens at the top with 13,000 candle power, which meant before the days of GPS, they would have this out as a floating lighthouse where you had a sandy bottom, you had no rocky area, and you could see it for about 24 miles. It took a large crew, about 18 men, had a very large anchor because it had to stay on station weighing about 5,000 pounds, and a double one to stay really secure. The worst thing this ship had to weather were the hurricanes that came through the Chesapeake Bay in the 1930s and the 1960s. 1962 hurricane snapped the chain of this vessel and took out the pilot house at the front, and it had to go back into Norfolk for repairs, but it was in pretty bad shape. So while some of these other vessels have been in warfare, the worst that this vessel has gone through is a hurricane, and that was enough, because that almost capsized this vessel. And now for something completely different, we've got Baltimore's own submarine, USS Torsk, which was launched in 1944, towards the end of the year, under Captain Bafford Llewellyn. It was involved in sinking some of the very last ships in the Japanese Navy in that war, but its primary goal and job was to pick up American airmen who had ditched in the Pacific Ocean and had to be retrieved by submarine or other vessel. It served in many duties in World War II, up through the Korean War, and even served as one of the ships picking up Russian merchantmen during the Bay of Pigs incident and checking them to make sure they weren't carrying nuclear vessels and nuclear equipment into Cuba. But the most impressive story of this submarine, and it's the only one we know of on record, it's the only submarine in any fleet anywhere that has sunk a train. The way it sunk a train, by launching torpedoes under a low ship that was high in the water, went underneath of the ship, up an estuary, knocked down the pylons of the bridge. The bridge came down, and so did the supply train that was on top of it. So as far as we know, it's the only sub in any fleet that has sunk a train. This is the National Aquarium in Baltimore, one of the 2 most visited sites in the city. Fort McHenry and this aquarium are the reason why most of our foreign visitors come here, and they see these first and see a lot of other things. This is not only a first-rate aquarium, but you've got 2 completely different biomes in here. You've got a desert and you've got an Amazon rainforest. So instead of having to get on a plane and go to different continents, you can come into one site here in Baltimore and see it all within these incredible exhibits. It's really worth the while, and it's just an amazing place. Bring your family, see some incredible creatures. This area is known as Acoustic Park, and it's one of the most unique city parks you're going to see anywhere in the United States. Everything involved in this park has to do with sound and music. From this aluminum cone behind me, which is a sort of echo chamber, to the xylophones that you can play along the wall of this particular fence piece. People are shocked when they walk by and find out that this isn't just a fence, it's a xylophone. Or if you like a higher tune, they definitely had some music students involved when they planned this park.
Hey, they messed up the hole. Let's see. You see the sun.
It's a really nice escape, and it's smack here in the center of the city. Even has some shade. So on a hot summer's day, when you want the water fountain and some cool area to rest yourself in the 90-degree Baltimore weather, this is a wonderful little place to hang out. This wonderful red building behind me is a Chesapeake Bay lighthouse. There are very, very few of these left. GPS has completely wiped out the need for these, but they used to be all over the area, from Thimble Shoals all the way down to the far reaches of the Virginia Capes. Because of the sandy bottom of the Chesapeake Bay, they could be kept low, and they were driven with stakes, iron stakes, many, many feet into the ground. They were still dangerous to be in when a hurricane came up, and the people living there, it's great if you're an artist or a writer, don't want to be around people a great deal and only go shopping every month or so. But if a storm was coming up, the Coast Guard would come to pay you a visit and offer to move you from your particular home. Baltimore was not only a seat of great sailing and maritime power, but with the rise of steam power, it became the hub of many railways, one of which was the first passenger railway in the United States. The B&O Railroad was the very first to run from Baltimore to Ellicott City and Washington, D.C. in the 1830s. That museum is on the west side of town. This museum is the Baltimore Civil War Museum and is also part of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railway. We also had the Northern Central, the Pennsylvania, the C&O, and the Western Maryland. They all came in here to Baltimore, but this is one of the oldest that's still in existence. Baltimore is interesting because none of the railways were in the center of town. You had to have stevedores and men on horses and draymen drag the cars between the various stations. That led to some interesting episodes in our history. One of the foremost parts of this museum, which is only the passenger terminal of the President Street station, as we call it, it's hard to say Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore very quickly, is that at least 6 known slaves, probably more, escaped from this railway, including Frederick Douglass and 6 other people, mostly men and women, some were married, escaped out of slavery by traveling on this railway. One of the first suburbs of Baltimore City was Jonestown, where we are now, and Little Italy, one of the best preserved ethnic neighborhoods in the city. Here you see a beautiful gateway that shows you a lot of the artistic and structural history, culture of this particular area. If you're looking for good food, pasta, antipasta, great Italian cooking, just a few hundred feet away from the inner harbor, Little Italy is the place to go. Many, many restaurants, and all of them are good. We're now in front of 1840s Plaza, which is several buildings that were Front Street pulled closer together for the City Life Museums. But this represents the Front Street Theater, which is very historic, which in 1860, the Democratic National Convention was held here, where the Democrat Party split between Breckinridge and Stephen Douglas. That split in Baltimore in 1860 forced another Democrat convention down in Charleston and enabled Abraham Lincoln to become President of the United States in 1860. So this is another very historic place in Baltimore. Also on this block, in the Charles Carroll area, Front Street, is one of the few remaining cast iron buildings of Baltimore. Baltimore had hundreds of these. This entire building, all the facade, all the columns are made of cast iron, which actually made it much cheaper to build than if you had hand carved any of that. Baltimore in the 1840s and 50s made as much iron and steel as Pittsburgh would do in the generation following, and this building is a testimony to that. In many of the older houses of Baltimore, you can still find those stamped iron ceilings in many of the houses throughout the city. They're the only remnants left. What happened to many of them? During wartime, the First and Second World War, they were recycled and melted down to make weapons, ships, planes, and tanks for the Allies in the wars of the 20th century. Behind me, you see another one of the iconic buildings of Baltimore. It appeared on early Baltimore postcards, in photographs, and was a mainstay in many eastern cities. We had 4 of these towers at one time in the city of Baltimore. This is the Phoenix Shot Tower. It was used for making bird shot starting in 1828, when a man from England named Watt had this idea of dropping molten lead from the top floor down into vats of water at the bottom and made bird shot for people to hunt wildfowl on the Chesapeake Bay in the Inner Harbor area and put dinner on their tables. This place made over 500,000 bags of 25-pound shot, and it did it year in, year out, all the way up to the 1890s when that form of manufacture became obsolete. When it was built, it was the tallest building in the United States at 234 feet tall. It used 1.1 million bricks, no scaffolding. Imagine that. Imagine building a building like that. What did they know in those days? I think a couple people were injured while they made it, but it's still a marvel that you could make such a structure at that height. And it wasn't surpassed until the Washington Monument was built in DC that there was a structure taller.
Well, that's everything. I hope you enjoyed. And if you're interested in going on this tour, go ahead and go onto explorebaltimore.org/tours, click Heritage Walk, and simply book it. And if you're interested in going on any other tours, the Baltimore National Heritage Area has tons to offer. So again, if you're interested in going on this tour, go to explorebaltimore.org/tours and click Heritage Walk. The tour is super fun, it's super educational, and we hope to see you there.